The first thing I did for this layout was find a color palette that I really wanted. So I found this image on Instagram and I thought that's a great color palette to go with the photo that I have. So I pulled the image into Photoshop and I'm using the eyedropper tool to pick the colors from that and create a little color palette there on the digital chipboard image on those letter circles. So I'm using that almost like as a paint palette when I color these pie shapes. I'm going to pull from that. So the reason that I'm not pulling directly from the image is because when you pull from an image, there's so many different shades within the image, and so having a solid color makes it a lot easier. So this is a half circle. That black half circle is from a December Daily kit, and I just am using it as a guide to lay these pie shapes on in a half circle. And so I think I create two, one top and one bottom here of these triangles next to each other. And then I'm going to color them different colors because I wanted a bunch of different little half circles with these pie shapes on them. So right now I'm just sort of getting them in there and I'm keeping them as different layers there in the layers palette because when I paint them, I only want to be painting certain ones. So I'm making them 3 inches wide because I have a 3-inch circle punch that I'm going to use to cut them out when I print them out. So here I'm making the other one. And originally I thought I'll have some be on the top and some be on the bottom, and then I thought, well, I could make some a little bit different angles to be a little bit more interesting. So I'm actually scrap lifting myself because I've actually done 2 layouts that kind of use this technique of half circles on top of each other. And I really like it, and I feel like if you find something you like, there's no reason not to do it, you know. So right now I'm using this random 3-inch circle just to get a sense of how these are going to lay when I print this photo out in 12 by 12, and is there going to be enough space? And what I ended up having to do is a 6 by 12 page on the left side because there wasn't enough room for the title and all 10 circles. So this is what I'm doing here is I'm telling 10 little stories. I do this a lot, little story compilations, and I love finding different ways to incorporate a certain number of stories into a layout. And so each of the half circles will be half journaling of a story and then half of like this little design here that I'm making. And I wanted to make sure and get a sense if I print these out at 3 inches wide, is that going to work size-wise? So now I'm using that palette to paint the different, I keep forgetting to touch the right layer. I'm painting the triangles different colors, and the stripe one's hard because you have to go through and do each individual stripe, which took a little bit of time, but I don't really mind stuff like that because I listen to TV while I do this, so I'm entertained. So then I just create an 8.5 by 11 sheet and drag that over, and I just do it over and over and over. And I think I did 5 of that first. I have 2 options here, so this one and the other one in terms of pattern. So I did 5 of each. And I just kind of eyed it, just random. I got some sense as I was going on, like I've used, the royal blue a lot, or I've used the red a lot. I tried to just kind of vary it. Make sure, for example, that polka dot pattern wasn't that blue, that specific blue, any more than once. So this grid one is where I learned how to do, what's it called? I think the color replacement tool. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to take time to fill each of those squares. That's just ridiculous. I'm not going to take the time to do that. But then I remembered there's this tool called the color replacement tool. So I actually just looked up on Google and YouTube how to use it. It's kind of a tough tool. It doesn't work if you need an exact color because I can't quite understand it, but there's something about the hue or the intensity of the color that's not quite right. So it worked for some of them, but it didn't work for all of them. And I ended up making these black. Actually, I might have ended up making them navy in the end. And I wanted to make sure that they were the right size for my circle punch as well. So I'm using the ruler there on the sides to make sure that it's 3/4 inch wide. And then I just use those on top of the circles as well. And so here's where I'm going to do the text. So half circle of text. So I'm using the pen tool. I do another tutorial on this on my YouTube channel if you want to see how I do this, but if there's 10 journaling, I think I did a couple that were this and then a couple that were lower and just kind of varied it. And some of the stories are really long, some of them are short, so I had to sort of pay attention to font size and all of that to make it all look okay. So basically doing the exact same thing as the other sheet, making it 8.5 by 11 and then dragging the text over for printing purposes. And I talk about this in the other video, but you want to make your text fill that entire circle. So make it justified so that it pulls all the way to the edge. Because if you made it center adjusted, then it wouldn't fill the circle quite as wide. And so that sheet that I keep pulling up with all the stories, that's where I'm grabbing and copying the text from. So there I use you go to view and show grid, and it creates an overlay grid so that you can draw things or create shapes in a more orderly fashion, which is what I did there. It just helps you to eye it a little bit better. So there I'm just working on the text, centering it. Sometimes I have to add like an extra word or, just literally for the design of it to make it feel a little bit different. And I'm just putting these on that sheet because I'm going to print it out. So I just need it to be there to be enough space between all the circles that I can use my circle punch. Yeah, I do go through and I make these navy. I have to watch my layers. Sometimes I'm using the paint bucket tool. Sometimes I paint the wrong section because I'm not on the right layer. And then these little word strips, I didn't have my physical kit yet, but I wasn't sure what size exactly they were. So I went ahead and just used the digital words and cut them out myself for the title. And I really needed the word in because I used the acrylic word pieces, and then the title is Pieces of Life in Story, but there was no in. So I'm using here what's that called? The clone stamp tool to make it, to get rid of the TO on there so that it just says in. And now I printed it out, and now I'm going through and cutting it. I'm using my 3-inch circle cutter to cut the text out. Just kind of trying to keep the same distance from the edge on all the text, even though some of the text is bigger than others. And then on the edge of it, in terms of the part that's sort of left there that I'm holding, I just use my rotary cutter here. I love that cutter. It's so nice to cut those edges. And, it's never perfect. I'm not a perfectionist about stuff like this. It's just, you really don't notice in the end product if it's not like a perfectly straight line. I love the way those circles turned out. They're so fun. They kind of have like a carnival feel. So there's the 12 by 12 photo, and I laid the circles out, and I think this is when I'm sort of realizing it's not all going to fit because I had forgotten that I was going to put a title on it. So, and this is why I like hybrid scrapbooking, because I don't think this part right here is as fun digitally. I feel like this is much more fun to use my hands, move things around, kind of get a sense of where do I want this, where do I want this. It's so much more tedious to do it with a mouse than it is to do it with your hands. This is kind of, for me, the therapeutic part of scrapbooking. And it means that things aren't going to be quite as precise, but I think that's the sacrifice that you make for the process. So I'm using my 3/4 inch circle cutter there to cut out those numbers. And I really was on the fence about how to do the numbers. I, at one point, had them sort of staggered all over the circles, and then in the end, I decided to put them in the middle. I don't think I videotaped the part of me playing around with where they should go, but there's lots of options of how I could have done that, but I liked in the middle of each circle. Adhering things down is always hard too, because just getting it, in the right order when you have things like this that are in straight lines. But again, I think it's important to not be a perfectionist about it, because that doesn't, it doesn't help anybody. It's not fun to obsess about it, at least for me. And then the of life and story there, those little word strips I printed out. And then the pieces, these acrylic words, I have found that red line tape is really the most effective thing for any kind of acrylic piece like that. It's, for me, I feel like it's the best adhesive that I've found to adhere things that are difficult to adhere down. Some stuff is so resistant, like rubber pieces. you know, it's like a year later you're going through your album and they're falling falling down the sheet of paper. So red line tape is a good investment in my opinion. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and thanks so much for watching.